Got the thumbs up. All right, hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is incredible. I mean, it makes sense, and it's well-deserved, but, like, I love seeing this packed house. Beautiful. Thanks, yeah. Woo! Love a good woo. All right, thank you. So, yeah, welcome. Thank you so much for being here as we close out this, what has been just a tremendous weekend of events celebrating City Lights and some authors who've recently published with them. So yeah, just such a pleasure to host Evan Kennedy, Mimi Tempest, Will Alexander, Roberto Harrison, along with our intrepid guide, Garrett Caples. Gonna just got some very brief remarks, but my name is Mike Wendt. I'm the programming director here at Woodland Pattern. So just a few things to say as we close out this weekend, mostly announcements. So I'll begin with a land acknowledgement and say that we at Woodland Pattern acknowledge that here in Milwaukee we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands, along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnick rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We further acknowledge the grave evil colonialism introduced to these lands through genocide as well as slavery, but also via racist and xenophobic beliefs, laws, and practices that continue to inflict harm upon Black, brown, and indigenous lives. We honor those who have lived and do now at these intersections of identity and experience and are committed to the active dismantling of white supremacy. So once again, thank you so much to all the poets who've participated. This has just been amazing. It's been an honor for all of us to host you all, to celebrate City Lights, to enjoy your offerings of lingual medicine, as Will put it in the conversation. It's been really deeply moving. So thank you to everyone at City Lights also, anyone who may be tuning in who's not here with us. And to everyone, again, I want to say that I'm lucky enough to be doing this work with everyone here at Woodland Pattern. So Molly, Marla, Alexa, Antonio, Louis, Jenny, and Laura, and Chuck. Thank you. Yeah, it's pretty great. You all are great. And of course, to all of you who've joined us throughout the weekend, including this evening. Okay, just a few more things. One is that we have books out there for sale. Of course, books by the authors who have joined us this weekend, but additionally, quite a wide selection of City Lights titles, kind of all over the front room of the bookstore, and it's really quite wonderful. Additionally, I didn't bring any up to the front with me, but there's a little packet of broadsides that's up front, and those are free to take. Those are sort of right at the front desk. We can let you know where those are if you'd be interested. Pack of 5, one of each, from each of the poets who've joined us. This reading, as all of our readings, is presented on a give what you can basis. So if you can give, we would greatly appreciate. We are a nonprofit, and your individual donations go a long way towards sustaining us. But most of all, thank you just for being here and making this space with us, which is the most important form of support. I mean, they're both very important. But, okay, and then I just want to say, yeah, come see us again. We've got a lot happening, a lot happening through the spring. A lot of amazing stuff. We have newsletters, print newsletters at the front that run through June. Everything's up on our website, woodlandpattern.org. And with that, I want to thank you, Garrett, so much for being our guide this weekend, our steward, as Mimi put it. It's a pleasure to welcome you one more time as we close out the weekend. So please welcome and thanks to Garrett Caples.
Thank you, everyone. Again, I just want to thank Woodland Pattern. This has just been incredible weekend to get the chance to, get together with all these poets and to be at Woodland Pattern, because this place is essential to American poetry, and I love coming here. So, and I realize it's a little ridiculous for me to fly in from San Francisco and introduce you all to Roberto, but but I will tell some stories anyways. About 10 years ago, I received a submission at City Lights from a poet I didn't know, Roberto Harrison. I think it was a manuscript for the book Bicycle. It was huge. So huge, I knew right away I wouldn't be able to publish it. Given that City Lights has no funding beyond what it makes in book sales, there's a kind of ceiling to the size of a poetry book we can do. And the Spotlight in particular is sort of geared to be around a 100-page book or so. But I was a conscientious young editor back then, and so I read it anyway. And I was really shocked by it. It was such an amazing, visionary tome, invoking his Panamanian heritage with a torrent of startling imagery on every page. There was manifesto-like passages portraying the Isthmus of Panama as a sort of bicycle of the world, tying it into his own practice of cycling around Milwaukee, investigating various traumatic life situations the poet had endured. There was also much discussion of the snake coiled at the center of the earth, which I found a little terrifying given my fear of snakes. But I knew I was being confronted here with a unique and important contemporary voice. Even though I knew I couldn't do this book, I wanted to encourage rather than discourage. So I wrote Roberto just a fairly candid letter about the sort of things I could and couldn't get away with at City Lights, and told him that I really admired the work. And so if he could get me a manuscript that was sort of on the scale of what I could do in the Spotlight series, I would be very interested in doing it. And so this led to some email correspondence between us, and we met up on one of his occasional visits to San Francisco, sometime in the next year or two. And then in 2016, I came out here, touring for a book I'd written book of poems called Power Ballads. And so I returned the visit, and it was my first time getting to be here, and I just fell in love with the place. In the meantime, Roberto's books seemed to be getting bigger rather than smaller. And I wondered if I'd ever be able to publish him at City Lights. The only despair I felt at that was tempered by the fact that his work was being picked up and championed by the likes of Carmen Jimenez, Tracy Grinnell, and even Lynn Hajanian. Rest in peace, Lynn. He was doing well, and his reputation had grown considerably, and even became Milwaukee's poet laureate. Finally, one day a couple of years ago, he wrote me and told me he'd finally written a book that was on the scale of a City Lights volume, and asked me to look at it. And the timing was just perfect, because at the time I was planning to publish Mimi Tempest in the Spotlight series, but it turned out the series the page is too small for what Mimi does. So very wide open field poetry, and so she needed something bigger, and I convinced City Lights to do that. But in the meantime, then I had a hole in the Spotlight series. So it was like Mike was saying, there's little bits of magic that happen, and something comes when it needs to come. And so Roberto just slid right in at the perfect time, because otherwise it could take a few years, given the smallness of the output that we can do at City Lights. So it was just perfectly timed, and so it allowed me to publish one of the poets writing today, who I most admire. And I don't think it's any exaggeration to say Roberto's book proved to be the catalyst for this entire weekend we've been having at Woodland Pattern, in honor of City Lights. And, in this place, as you know, has championed him as a hometown hero. He should be introducing me. You guys know him, you don't know me. Nonetheless, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome to the microphone my good buddy, Roberto Harrison.
Thank you, everybody, Garrett and everybody. I wanted to sort of get a couple things across before I started reading. And there's a poet in Canada named Tim Lilburn. He says that poetry is a wilderness of language. And as I mentioned earlier today, my first collection was called Darien, which is the jungle in Panama. And I'm now on Tropical Lung, which is the cleaning part of the purifying part of the jungle. And Will had said recently that the Congo is the heart of the world, and I agree with that. But I also think the Amazon is the heart of the world. And I also think that Darien is the heart of my life, in some sense. And, you know, I do have these experiences that people call psychosis that are beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They're not easy to describe. I've never seen them described in a book. But sometimes magical things happen in these states. And years ago, I found myself wandering around in my car in a thunderstorm. And part of what I do is I try to find Panama here. And in this traveling a long time ago, in a thunderstorm, I ended up in a small town called Darien, which is a town here near Milwaukee. And then also I learned later that Madison is the only major city, or I think the only major city in the continental United States that's built on an isthmus. And so also in one of these states in San Francisco a long time ago, I had my dad's long antelope skin jacket, and I was walking around, and I had a pack of tarot cards, and I buried it in a children's playground. And I remember the idea at that point was that someday children are going to recreate my life. And I didn't do it on purpose. It wasn't a prophecy. It was just it was a gesture. And now I'm lucky enough to work at the Indian Community School with kids K4 to 8, and they're recreating my life. And I think that's a miracle. And so further to find parallels, we now live next to Gary's pet jungle. The first and last bird flies asleep. I must grow the night in the swift flying and sleep, as a dragonfly swarm makes a book of the ark and the loon. With blood in the sun, a woven destruction sees that the forces are there to mark the sand with the daylight, by stars for the hunt, in the mud as they grow, in the forest, in the body, as light moves the grid out of center, as the horses escape, in the wood and the axe, through the agency of the trees, a rocket, alert to the earth, in a fossil, burns off the air in a lasso, for the interface of the jungle, for the eclipse of the rain, at the entrance, a double return, and the way that the arrows cut through to the palms, for the center, to find the sweet silt of the yellow star entrance, for death, to bind the moonlight to the still river. I speak the colors of the ants' dreams in passing, my symbols metal, a move for the knife, for the last number of fish, for the force of the feather of blackness and the starlight, to pull back the straw from the unseen axial border, connecting catastrophe, home by search, with the mutilations, a flood, cockroach acephalate. Delete Mount Rushmore. The color of blood and the color of night fail to be shadows, as a rope pulls its own family detriment on the other side of the face, as a remainder pushes to a nuclear shirt, and some background exception places the red mark under the jungle process to redo the body, and feel out the fast calculation of an ulterior mind. For the most correct description does its fashion under the coat and deceives what? The momentary escape from murder, the small conversation show that the country makes as it falls, when the season and its hostile number relieve for the grown bank rot of the execution that does not allow, the face-to-face wheel that takes away the underlying force and the ocean swelling to betray the declaration, and its precepts circling accumulation and sorrow, without one to release and to become the memory of its relation outside of the haunt of the business cycle of terror, where the mud climbing returned to the home of the sea, as its language is, placed outside on the many growths to the front, to equate the weapon and assault, but then the eatery comes on to resent and to happen as a connection to wind and terror again with mud on my hands. Where is the blood? What the four returns to the approaching eastern side of the soft resemblance as some sentimental pit allows the exec to kill her again and to run without memory, as a tree and its resin do not count. Also, the arrangement and the sound of nothing do to belong and cross out the meaning of books, and to resemble another voter that is cut and weaponized beyond the number of surprise, and the about to the wicked was to move under, as confusion was not mine, but shared and trouble, like the force of a wheel and its return to the ground. Sent the Mabillion jargon via isthmuses. That's my email signature on my cell phone. So I talk about Mabillion jargon in the intro to this book, and I make everything an isthmus, all the networks, everything's Panama. Hosts in the sky make paths to the carriers. They fold to return to the oceans and dust by the face. I remember to walk and reveal every story in wind under night. Packets of light and the sounds, the shells. Keep up as the one of a presence will stare through the window of two every day. That was our training for now with the screens, and that was a broken outside that has grown in the sea, marked for a country of signs. Each song does not stop at the cut for the race, and each does not know its own neck. They yell out for salvation and move to belong to the corn. But the wind is the same as the river through seasons read close by return. Whenever the segments of life now entomb are thick webs for the answer, as a fine one to touch and be soft for the war. Our beacons call ice to remain in the underground, oceans to find us a way to endure. Each pulse would not remember the time of the shadow. Each limb calls itself from the heart of the other to claim an intention for dust in the sea. But Carib explosions reveal what the night has to offer survivors, as each of its sparks start a fire to begin without knees. Even as starlight will never remember our answers to the singular mouth of beginning. Even as wars become lost to the trees and their talk underground makes us bleed. Our beliefs are not finished from starting and falling anew, but the documents show that there was a balance to books, but that law had removed this from us in the color of twilight, bled like the animals gone. Every night I become like the ceiling of exits and call us the grandmother song. We sink then to freeze like each catalog marked with an entry of ancient intention and surfaced for sanding to make with the door for the entry of love. All my relations are gone and become like the spirit of Crazy Horse pierced through my side. I was a they as a tech made to wander Mobilla, and I was a zero to see like the one of return to the night. Mobilla just wanders and coats every wound with attachment and silence as mounds remain witness to song and survivance. But the world stays the same for the blind, and Mobilla has moved to the isthmus inside, as we're mobile and wandering go for the Mongol invaders, as the empires arise and collapse for the Kumza, made dust for the Caribs through raids on the sea. The upside of service. A letter arrives as insignia, but without a host of paper connections, as the heat stays undone to speak to the other night and become animal like trees, making the cut to perceive underground the impossible answers revolve and display like a city under an abandoned town that burns and smiles through violation without bodies. We lose our service parameters. for the harm of the table, for super-fast connections and dreams struggling to see morning outside the outside. They cannot speak either, and they cannot see it inside the fire easily to explain the loss of the liver light, an offering of archaic entanglement. But they tie up and they plant a body, a body, a body. Nobody now, world without end, on a line of protest, even outside of the West, because nothing is put there to run in a knot. But the books come back and harvests return, each hyper-rational star, for a bloat of conjugations, for becoming close. Cacti bring my face to you because the jungle's occupied and no longer available to the midnight refuge that something is someone believes. They never knew either because the letter and the symbol heart do not correspond in its way, in the way that makes chemical relation possible, and now in the distant past. But the laughs are together, and the weeping is perfectly spherical, if only because of the hints from our interior proofs of reverse topologies. We went the wrong way, though. Return hoops exist, and they patch in an outlook on life, if only an absence lets us go there, like red and black answers. For the pus of sandhill crane dreams, they smile again with the kites, with red on top, to believe in the end of coercion, and life becomes so pleasant in the afterimage of sudden explosions, and death for nothing like a book in the alleyways hidden from the rabbits. It's murder. The black and white one has the answer in its right front paw and jumps around without us. Every day it escapes the bit. What is a standing eclipse for? That the beacon of the in-between was not right, that something needed to be said about the writing practice of beginning. Oceans see oceans, night and light and red. It carves itself, a mountain after straw disguise, and because of danger, with exactly the right weather, in the summer, inside a snowflake, of the collapse of a network of mind, counting the scars I see, the rabbits, but then I interrogate again for the meat I take without them and do not want, but that is reversible as the tree banishes itself from its own interior. We have to talk about the being. Will it hold us all balled up like a cramp that makes the bed short and easy to start? Walking around at night, I divide us so that we speak again through a cultivated wilderness as a blood clot answers in tobacco. They know there was smoke, but not that the world is here too, and I speak in reverse to allow myself to become a placeholder for plural consciousness from way before the end of the beginning of erasure. My words split without blood, and it is easy to speak to other interfaces about my screen, which I exude. Fresh lemon rinds spray themselves around us as we overcalculate the lesson behind growth flowing through the big bangs. Let's laugh about it so that we can shoot some and get away with it. I wanted a door like that number, except to sell hairballs for the retreatants, and bullets in the tables and chairs are all set up, and we are ready to eat with purpose and decline with the atmospheres. Who turns the light off anyway? I don't see anything, and it's already morning. Do you have electricity? Do your savings allow for the bus too? I mean the 4 wheels. I was right about that number, and it's not the case of hearing cicadas that I am surrounded by 7s. I spoke to you again last time about it, and then the counter was removed because no one wanted to attend to each other, and now we're all afraid. Here, let's get lost and make a big bomb of ourselves. But even if the war is not my fault, it is my problem. I just want some water coursing through the old paths to the ferns. February 24th, 2022. I find myself here, through disaster and forgetfulness, and I have not known the center of the fire. If the same can be said for the others, then I will not sleep in the country as a promise of night. But my skull is made as a flower, and my body has sprouted to sleep in the earth where the others are. And my form is gone for the ocean, faded along with the blood. We make night, and the weather is answer, and rise to the salt and the smoke of the moon through a song. Panama is my home in the darkness. I arrived here from Panama when I was 7. I am no longer 7. Now I am 4. My origin was made in an origin state. I extrapolate consciousness from numbers to form interiors, arranged by sevens to infinity as archaic design. All my books are about Panama in some way, inside of color and beyond it, inside of origin and beyond it, beyond geography, beyond topology and algebra, grown from impossibility there, as ontology, as spiritual state, as reflection through Saloma, as a place of many fishes, as a place of many butterflies, with orchids of all colors and patterns. Panama is a cubit, the quantum, the in-between. It is a bridge of the world, the snake. It connects the oceans to the sea and links the hemispheres as a center of the bicycle of the earth and of the mind of the earth. From a tall, thin hill there, I find the only entry and the only exit for the Tecumseh Republic. Through circles and gourds, I am a Tech, a citizen of the Tecumseh Republic. I am a Tech Panamanian nationalist, with nation as being time, Dogen as gourd pattern, through a tropical lung, formless and without borders. Panama is my home in the darkness, and it sees through the face and through the interface as we move past the screen and arrive to the 4 sevens inside of Abya Yala. Death is between us. I become the night when the stars fade into the sea. My patterns of straw on the plants are adorned with blood clots at every crossing, and musical numbers that shatter a first relation. This morning I awaken to another constellation. As I see, I remember the sacred animals. I cut myself into ribbons, and I give the organs of my isolate languages to the bears. We do not wear away the rivers. If I ever speak again, I will say that I am not the center of the target, and that my other body replaces the news with solitary depths and entanglements. The rivers inside me are the reason, and we do not know the country or its veneer, the shadow placed inside us to sound out the miraculous insubordinations that we are to wear away the red earth of our absences. Without me, you will see that others know the answers to history, and that history will begin to dissolve in the morning. As we shadow the night, when I walk outside the light, I erase myself to be the breathing soil, to be the oceans. We do not turn our connections, the sounds of the earth, to the body bears and the weed coyotes without words and texts. And the stars of expansion that we negotiate with, as something places us inside the atmosphere and welcomes the dust that I close the desperate songs of sorrow with. And the page that must be torn becomes again in every way. I am no longer with you. In every way, I separate myself from vital bales of straw to accept that I must speak to the door, as the faint aroma of our disappearances have made the world blink only twice. The support of endurance and of our sound symbology bring us to the simple collapse of the anointed spirals of the seashells, as we inside are tied into the hatred of another, which is a fire that does not burn. Please eclipse my other bodies as they must not be found. In the struggle to speak like a cut, all our destinations now are dear, as we hold the darkness of the tropics in our minds and split the red and the black snake in the center of its circles, like the equator does the earth. Our memories evaporate. We do not relate the night again, as we all endure and betray the innocent contradictions. And as we never wake through the seasons of a murderous adornment, the sun must stop us before we turn to the night, and the center of the earth awaits us in the battlefield where we are lost, with the exception of the bites of the flowers. Do not call me by your languages. I explode now to invent the darker reasons for alliance and the exit of the mind to nowhere. Bring the sand again, as I do not enforce my own face to the password of the agency, the salt of the other's terror. Be the light, unknot our failures, and be the source of fire forever. Please, we must become a kingfisher path for an origin state. Many rivers have knotted themselves for the kingfisher of my nighttime, washed in the distance, to have us stand again among the pines that fall and do not know the water. Every time I see that there is a call to make the light stand in color and to put off the rooster that crows there in a distant galaxy known by the others as the kingfisher without the bigger people of America. In this, my red and black starlight that sees a kingfisher and does not know it. In this that I unravel for a table that stands between us, I swim back to the skeletal shore. Through these lines I must see that the bigger people of America have lost themselves in the asterisk, in the center of darkness that I unravel to call my own. In the kingfisher story, there is nothing of the lake of the atmospheres that we must dissolve to remain otherwise in our meaning in the last not made for tomorrow. All of us now look to the red and the black before the suffering of the night makes us flesh again by the roadside to live in the net of exception. All of our minds are ripped to exclaim that the kingfisher gives, the eagle, the osprey, and the loon, because I am the loon again, to make circles and spheres remain in the morning as the desperation of all the televisions rots. My numbers have not known it. I am not seen by the shore that I calculate as ours for the robots behind the kingfisher stories that call us to begin again outside tomorrow. I do not see the kingfisher. I do not know it, except long ago as I lost the shore of your mind to the water. My door retains itself to keep morning within the night. I dissolve the numbers again, as I do not lure the fish for the kingfisher. The kingfisher is a bird that I knew was here. It is the omen that I carry through war in the service of my reception to the morning, as we all must delete the faces that do not receive when something comes to start. My radio needs the heart of the kingfisher too, as we all follow the semblance of night with the semblance of morning, delayed without the earth. We walk and we inject the water with animal intimacies as we speak to make lines become our entrance to the exit of life. Something moves there as we are to receive it. But I do not know the kingfisher. I do not know that there are others who have moved inside us to wash out the oceans to the sea, as we must make ourselves a body of destination. Our bodies become like origins and are not in the service of parchment, parched and dying of thirst to the problems that serve as the keys to the mountain, with the death of the kingfisher there in the egg of its origin, headed for the fountain of light. My escapes have become like the service of every answer, of the separation that dissolves to make us come together in squares of electrocutions, headed to discover the other world far inside the earth. A for the start, and Y for the middle. Abia to mean, and Yalla to hold in the darkness. Thank you.
Roberto Harrison. Oh, thank you so much. It's been almost 30 years since I first met Will Alexander. It was 1995. My best friend Andrew Jorn had just published Will's book, The Stratospheric Canticles, on Pantograph Press. Almost simultaneously, Sun and Moon Press published Will's Asia and Haiti, 2 long poems each devoted to a locale. 2 long poems devoted to each locale. At the time, Will only had 2 prior books to his credit, Vertical Rainbow Climber and Arcane Lavender Morals, so it was in a sense a watershed moment for a man who'd already devoted a substantial portion of his life to poetry. Without worrying about exact dogma, I think it's safe to say that Will's poetry is surrealist, though like other great surrealist poets, it means he's unique. His work is thick, not simply with imagery, but with vocabulary, retrieving rare words from the storehouse of his reading, even as it conveys astonishing but true information he unearths from natural history and philosophy, among other places. He's really unlike any poet I'd ever read before, and I was instantly an admirer. He lived and still lives in LA, but he came up to San Francisco often enough in the late 90s and early 2000s that I was able to hang out with him a fair number of times, and we became friends. One day he invited Andrew and me to North Beach to meet his friend, the first and perhaps greatest American surrealist poet, Philip Lamantia. City Lights had published Philip's Bed of Sphinxes the year before, and suddenly he was emerging from a long reclusive period. This meeting lasted 12 hours and encompassed coffee, drinks, joints, dinner, an endless conversation. And to say that it determined my destiny is no exaggeration. Without becoming close to Philip, I never would have gotten involved with City Lights in the first place, let alone become an editor there. So anything I've accomplished there, I lay at the feet of Will Alexander with immense gratitude. Will was one of the first people I wanted to publish, naturally, once I was able to acquire things for the press. And as with Roberto later, I asked Will to give me a book of short poems for the Spotlight series, even as his own work was trending in the opposite direction, more expansive. But he agreed, and he made a book of short poems happen, noting the process in its very title, Compression and Purity, which was number 5 in the Spotlight series. In between when I started that project and published it, New Directions published the Sri Lankan Loxodrome. So it's safe to say 2010-11 was a watershed moment for him again, being championed by the 2 presses who had supported his forerunner and inspiration, Bob Kaufman. I feel like Will's reputation really skyrocketed at that point, and he's since had no shortage of presses publishing his books. But it seemed important for City Lights and New Directions to continue to support this work, and I even coordinated with my opposite number at New Directions, Jeffrey Yang, to make sure our scheduling didn't conflict, but rather fueled each other. As New Directions began promoting its latest book by Will, Refractive Africa, he and I started working on Divine Blue Light for John Coltrane at City Lights, which became the 62nd volume in the press's Pocket Poet series. And if I've ever done anything to repay Will what I owe him, I suppose getting him into the Pocket Poet series. But even before we went to press, I found myself reading in the New York Times an announcement that Refractive Africa was one of 2 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. Sort of thing you dream of happening to one of your poet friends, but I never thought Will would receive that kind of mainstream recognition just because he's so far against mainstream American culture. Granted, he was older, and the world was finally catching on to him, but it was a little like Artaud winning a Tony. So 2021-22 was yet another watershed moment for him, and I feel immensely privileged to have witnessed and even participated in it. So everyone at Woodland Pattern, please join me in welcoming Will Alexander.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Will and Pat, and thank all of you for being here. Thank you for Roberto, everybody, for the commingling here this evening. I wanted to, life is a big, monstrous whirlwind. So I'm going to read from a few copies of works across time and space, one of which will be Divine Blue Light, but also I'm going to start with this smaller volume from London, Charismatic Spirals, maybe a few copies out in the store. And this was done as we speak a few moments ago in terms of time and space. And I wanted to start with a poem, a two-line poem. I don't want to read my poems, but they go from 2 lines to over 600 pages. So that's out there in the store too. But anyway, I don't want to get too much banter here. We're going to start with a poem called Bekudo. Now, Bekudo is interesting because it's one of the 5,000 extrasolar planets that sweeps inside its own sun and survives the transit. The cosmos is a major mystery. Bekudo, it's just 2 lines. Improbable plane that sweeps inside its sun as survival. The cosmos is miraculous, beyond our cognitive understanding of what we think we are and how intelligent we are. Poetry unmasks all of that and allows us all to explore. And I'm going to do another smaller work from this volume, Charismatic Spirals. It's entitled Powerless Self-Judgment. Came out in New York Times magazine a few months ago. The body as deserted burning witness, as ghost, as primeval leper that attempts to lessen its own ruin by telepathic power, beyond its state as catastrophic cretin in judgment of itself, as toneless mirage being factor by phoneme, by nerveless adventure, as powerless stride that it corroded its own apparition. We'd never imagine ourselves as being who we really are. Our little scripts of who we are, our little testament to psychoanalysis, something that we're living in a truncated era that, according to the great Richard King, who most of you don't know, is the great psychoanalyst, late African-American psychoanalyst, he says the Egyptians were doing psychoanalytic theory 3,000 years ago. So we're as Dr. Naeem Akbar said, we're behind ourselves as a human species. I'll say that as I go along. I'll address that as I go along. But I wanted to read one of the poems that is kind of a bellwether for me across time and space. This it's entitled "The Nexus of Phantoms" from one of my first New Directions volume. It's called Sri Lankan Loxodrome. It's about a sailor that's going through the Indian Ocean. He catches snakes in the Indian Ocean. This Nexus of Phantoms is from this volume of the Sri Lankan Loxodrome. In a lorikeet cave, motions exist of disintegrated swans. In a translocated lake brimming with harvested poisons, sealed by corruptive postmortems. Such swans, staggered by microbial reasoning, their aggressive nest, anatomical with anomaly, with drifts of strenuous incarnadine meanings, with a thirst which hurdles conspiratorial invasives, alive with coronal oceanics, open like a clouded trail of rendings. Analogous with the ox the pelicans, the mergansers, perhaps with the petrels and the gannets under the power of darted, mocking orations. The swans looking back on solemn blood perusal like a form of death, breaking roses on the shore. It is the example of phonograms, of lost and compacted lenses turning within a charismatic fall line, or an isoneph, or what an avian would announce in Greenland as a katabatic wind. The swans, like a haze of magnetism or implied gondola locations where the scent of each lorikeet is consumed, is brought to dazzling eclipse refulgence. In another foci, in another depth, their form self-challenged, in a cloak of suns, their power de-revealed with 7 moons burning, reduced to 2 intense incendiary magnets. And these incendiary magnets, like a nexus of phantoms, scattered across a geometric optometry. So what we do with poetry is not investigate, but explore throughout the cosmos, because we got to realize we're all in this thing together. Whatever we are taught, we believe in this or that or this or that region, we're just in it. And you know what the Hubble has done the James Webb has done, has opened us up to a wider range of possibly who we are. We're just still in the midst of it. Like we're acting in some ways like we're headed to the end, but maybe we aren't. We're in this eternal spiral going around. I don't psychologically listen to the seethings coming out of Occidental culture. It's foreshortened culture, and it's kind of like a plague at this time in the consciousness of the universe, because we're going in other directions right now, and we have to trust where we're going. We can't just listen to what the news is telling us, but where are we going? Where are we psychobiologically going? So this is one of my older volumes. By the way, this is the only volume I have of this work. It's called Above the Human Nerve Domain. And it's entitled The Impalpable Brush Fire Singer. No, he is not an earned singer, nor does he carry on rapport with negative forces within extinction. He is the brush fire singer who projects from his heart the sound of insidious subduction, of blank anomaly as posture, of opaque density as ash. He, distanced from prone ventriloquial stammer, from flesh and habit and drought. The performer, part poltergeist and orisha, part broken in cellular dove, part glance from floating Mongol bastions, where the spires are butane, where the photographic fractals are implanted with hypnosis. Because he allegedly embodies a green necrotic umber, more like a vertical flash or a farad, posing like a tempest in a human chromium palace. Therefore, his sound, a dazed simoom in a gauntlet, a blizzard of birds burned at the touch of old maelstroms. Because he gives off the odor of storms, this universal orisha, like a sun that falls from a compost of dimness, out of de-productive hydrogen sums, out of lightless fissures which boil outside the planet. Yes, he sings at a certain pitch which has evolved beyond the potter's field, beyond a tragic hummingbird's cirrhosis, surmounting primeval flaw, surmounting fire from forms in irreplaceable disjunction. Under the certain forms of the zodiac, he is listless. He intones without impact. His synodic revelations no longer of the law of measured, palpable destinations, because he sings in such a silence that even the rishis can't ignore. As though the hollow power which reignites from nothingness perpetually convinces, like a vacuum which splits within the spinning arc of an intangible solar candle. Such power can never be confusedly retraced because it adumbrates and blazes like a glossary of suns, so that each viral drill, each forge casts a feeling which insaturates a pressure, bringing to distance a hidden and eluded polarity. Like a subjective grill, like a subjective skill, corroded and advanced, he sings beyond the grip of a paralytic nexus, where blood shifts, beyond the magnet of volume, where the nerves no longer resonate, inside an octagonal maze stung at its source by piranhas. And we are stung all the time by these natural forces. You know, it's my contention that all of our knowledge on Earth comes from the cosmos itself. It doesn't come from a European citadel in Romania. or some ignited postulate like that. It comes, as indigenous people know, it comes from the universe. It comes from the heavens, and this is something that all Egyptian knowledge, like Schwaller de Lubitz says, has come from the practitioners of Nubia and Egypt, or Kemet, black soil, it's known. But, you know, the thing is to get into that vibration. That's where I'm living at, in that vibration. Not in science, to me, is great, but it's an ancillary understanding. It's not the primary understanding. It's like somebody eating just, you can eat them, but it's like eating radishes for nourishment. That's what advertising does. It makes you eat radishes for nourishment and tells you that you're educated. It's a problem. It's a problem because everybody's, you know, I go through the Google headlines and it's really, really strange. Not to be hypnotized by it, but just to know what's there. And, you know, I'll just have to just say it's mostly junk. So I know they're watching you, everything you're looking at, but sometimes I'll just center on something to see how they're going to respond to sending me ads. So it's beyond, it's not humorous, but it's true. So here's a lesser known animal or being, I should call it it's an ignited being on this earth. It's called within the opaque termites morass. They of collided pincer malfunction, of egregious clashings of dread, of the privity of corroded malarial witness, embedded in a boiling worm foundation. This life conducted in a smoky, horrific substratum fed by miraculous enmity, by seismic fault, by riddled tarantula mound, by blank tornado morass. Each haunted aspiration within imploded flanks of soil, within its rotted neon stochastic. And these implosions burn and scatter their inversions as if wheat were pictured in the elusive flash of primordial fungus, of crystallized by acidic fallopian state, by a forge of molecules scattered as oblivious distraction. This life which functions as a limitless biochemical mortality, as an alchemical ridge or an asteroidal morgue. They weed flames from exploded rain sieves who take as status vicious armaments of wood under blank absorption suns, moving like a voracious flood of pale neutrino trout, stunning, invulnerable, like a scurrilous cortical mimetic beneath a flask of imploded or exploded grain in a well. Or a cloudy reptilian salt where generic abasement burns and ghostly electrodes extend into treeless electrical shocks and gullies. And from this intensity, a leap of telepathic kindling from the poles of Alpha Centauri, from a pre-existent wormwood, from a riveted fire on Callisto. Therefore, from old oppositional lightnings, from its fleece of flaming stissels, there comes to exist an alien iridium lantern, where its instantaneous beam, which penetrates the thorax, which coils and recoils the termites' impact antennae, as they ceaselessly inflame the wrenching leonine soils. Everything is alive, which is natural indigenous kindling, and they kill me when they say we're going to search for where there is life. All of it's living, but how do you classify how life has been classified? Like American Indians. I wrote a book about the first constellation of the Western world was in Egypt and Islamic Granada, where the Muslims and the Jewish people founded the Western university system, Oxford, Salamanca, Coimbra. And for the West, it's kind of tried to erase this history. It's ridiculous. But, Copernicus and Abu Said Sinjari, who was the first person to implicate the sun system, the heliocentric system, 400 or 500 years prior to Copernicus. We don't know these things because they've been occluded from the history of the authorship of the so-called Occident. But, the street lighting in Granada was around 700, 800. The lights in London didn't get on until about early 1800s, 1804 or so, like that. They don't want to get into any tedium and disrupt the reading, but there was a gentleman named, one of the early mayors of London was named Henry Barton. In the 1300s, had talked about the opening of the lighting system in urban streets. It didn't happen until the 1800s. But according to the chronicle that we have in the Occident, they did it in London, not the Muslims in Granada, which is obviously the real reality of what's to be living. So I'm not saying this in an oppositional pattern. I'm just saying it in a reality pattern. How are we going to unite as the human species? How can we unite as the human? We can't just unite like I said, just eating a partial diet. You got to open up to the whole diet. So this is what I attempt to do in poetry. I don't want to give a lecture up here, but I'm going to get into my memoranda, but I don't want to do that right now. But I'm going to read the first few pages of Refractive Africa, which Garrett has generously pointed out that they surprised me, and I didn't expect it. I didn't even know they do Pulitzer Prizes and how that was working. Somebody called me up, a distant person that I knew, and just said that they got nominated. I said, oh, I just kept writing that day, honestly. And I'm not saying that just to say this, but this is a long piece. I'm going to just read about the first quarter, two and a half pages, maybe not even that long, first quarter and a half page. This is a long piece for Amos Tutuola. And it's called, the name of this poem is entitled, I don't remember my titles all the time, but it's called Based on the Bush of Ghosts, for Amos Tutuola. By the way, I'll say more about that in a minute after I read this. Having risen above dubious salt infernos, an absence of rules in your blood, never extended into doctrinal edicts. You, Tutuola, comparable with cosmic infra-forces, with wheat that blazes, rife with its own combustible plane. You, all the while, roamed the anarchic as ozone, as region, as dark interior hollow of strife. You wandered through oniric vacuums, what some would call anarchic jubilation, seemingly blinded, seemingly spun by discomfort, by winds which sprung up and menaced, by forces which summoned themselves through attrition. Amish, you were not a corpse sculpted out of ash, but vehicular anonymity as voyage, as physiology summoned from unnameable tension. This remains your creed, or your living example, your ability to singe, to stumble as a haze through incitement, to invade its sigil through raucous tipping points. There are forces you continue to breed, being powerful towers of smoke that remain chronically unfiltered as the high symbology of the inscrutable, as if you had invoked exhaustive sands, squared at the root by corroborated cinder, by corruptive intensification. You know, I can go on and read. I don't want to just read, but it's too long. So, you know, I write long, but I find that poetry is something you can just insulate. You can get into a river of poetry, and it doesn't have to have a long arc. It can just be in a concentrated arc, and you can get the same experience from it. At least I do when I'm writing. So, by the way, you know, one is, like Roberto and I, we're not interested in performance. I'm just reading and talking to you. Just like I'd be talking to Roberto on the phone or just talking to Garrett on the phone. We just talk. I'm just talking to you this way. So that's all we can do. That's all we can do in this life. And I'm going to read from Divine Blue Light. Here's an example. It's called Original Language. As a blizzard of birds, as Hottentots, as density by phonemes. We're going to keep going in that vein of consciousness, but I'm going to read the title piece for John Coltrane, who's really, really saved my life across time and space, continues to do that. Once you know, Train says, anybody ever heard of Africa Brass? People in this audience would know, because Train says, yeah, I hear that drone coming in, man. You know, and by the way, you know, I can get into all this history. Train coming up on this Africa Brass in Los Angeles. And Tyner was messing around with some great block chords. And as he was hearing these block chords, the synthesis of Africa came to him. And Eric Dolphy was involved with the situation too, with his knowledge of Africa, musical knowledge of Africa, spontaneous understanding of Africa, and learned understanding of Africa. But here it was, and I'm going to read you a few lines of this poem. It's Divine Blue Light, sudden, ungraspable nomadics. Not a phantom blinding, but the soils of Mount Meru, as quantum, as perpetual, as interdimensional kindling. Its hemispheres colliding as bricolage, as osmosis, as sonic notation, alive as sonic cometary phantoms, understood unto themselves as stratospheric particulates, not merely as tense foundational structures, as a pronoun to be levied, as simple sonic ramification. You understood this to be in the infinity of your heart, to be microscopic musical grammar, not unlike phosphates, or as a syntax of symmetry resounding as an obverse mirroring of chords, analogous to 16th notes rising and scattering of their own accord, much like the residue from diamonds that bake, not simply shrill supplication as noise, but as spectral realms of themselves. Being sonic blinding bodies that rise and loop and gather themselves on the other side of themselves, not as artifact or translated merger, but exploration as summons, so that the sonic never wizens by pursuing entangled osmosis as complex utopian turquoise. And it was on that plane that you and Dolphy squared private comment into thrilling electrical prophecy that both forged and scrambled light, so the amperage split apart and scattered across soil as interregnum, being blizzards of grammar, not merely emitted from bodies, but sound as hail from unknown wizardry, as that sired sonic thoughts and streams, understanding such flow as transmuted acre. I'm a believer understanding that, like Ernst Mach says, you can move your hand and you can move a star. But you know, the understanding of like Train always said, keep on cleaning the mirror, keep on cleaning yourself. You know, you're not just a principled person that just stands in one space and knows yourself permanently. You're not the same person you were when you were 5 years old. But you gotta work at yourself. So the society tells us who we are, and we accept that script, and we try to fit ourselves into that script. And a lot of times it doesn't work. And for me, it just turned into poetry. So anyway, I don't want to take too much time here, but I'm going to read two more. And then this was published in, where was this published? In Eastern Connecticut. In fact, I'm going back to Connecticut pretty soon to talk at a musical conference. But everything figures in this world that we're in. And this is one of my spontaneous inspirations. It's called hyperspatial rotation. I'll read the whole piece. Scripted according to the capacity of compound isolation as evolutionary whirling of levels that translate to cellular blizzards that magically accrete as higher states, as impalpable caverns that rise and transmute consciousness. For the individual, these psychic cellular states cast in transparent wattage that authors inscrutable singularity as pattern alchemically contending with friction itself. This being a level where one can never be scripted as toneless cartographical blankness, but where communication plies itself with endemic riverine telepathy, overarching fragmentation. One becomes attuned to a borderless grammar as one with pouring psychic waves sans ideology from compound ideology that then persists as crystalline, as crystal-like, charged with an interior kinetic that issues from rotating figures in the mind. They being none other than immanence, as stunning peripheral figures casting implausible wavelengths from shadow. There then emits aural emission from less direct planes that authors itself as optical aurality, so as to hear via interior modes of thought that erupt as spectacular hybridity. You know, I don't expect people just to get this stuff right away. Don't. Just let it get in your system. You know, there's a person that I'm familiar with that I learned from the great filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky. You know, Jodorowsky made this comment about Edward de Bono. Edward, a lot of people don't know who he is. He was a great inventor, medical person, grew up in English on Malta, I think it was, from a family of physicians. But interesting man, wrote this book called Lateral Thinking, which I've been absorbing. And he says there's ways of absorbing information, not in a linear script, which is the way that they understand things in the West only. How does one spin the mind? Get into this plane of, I call a rotational entry, into other planes, so you find other ways into what you know. And that's what I've been doing with these poems. It's an experiment in the mind. So in the meantime, I don't want to stand up here too long, but I'm just going to maybe read one more poem, and we'll see how things go. This is called Condemned Literary Pontoon. Metamorphic visual rest as coruscating plague, being culpable feeding by multiplied dishonor. The culpable vanity that multiplies events, populates its own fear as demonstrable abyss, as populated plesiosaur's prison, being ossification as seeming magnetic by stunning, by vicarious discipline, constructed by shattered diamonds, being principed by scarification, as flailing literary pontoon, being intelligent by its own harassment, by trenchant scholarly foils, as it rankles, as it falsifies by scholarly grandeur, as cortical evidentiary adage, as decipherment by fettered cultural haze, being sterile phlogiston as grammar, as quickened riddles that morph into isolate phantoms of themselves, being creed as oblivious howling. We're dealing with oblivious howling all the time. Noise, just a lot of noise. But, you know, Breton was one of these people that, he said there was something suspect about the literary novel. He didn't just try to just blanketly, he did blanketly condemn it, but he was saying it's another way of rising. Everything's, the way you gotta rise, you just can't laugh off what he's saying, because these are instructional pamphlets to get into another rise of consciousness. And while I'm up here, and I'll say one quick thing, there's another group that was cut off by, you know, the hounding, I must say, of the way that the energy instructed itself in 1928 at one of the bars, the Bar Chateau in Paris. Garrett might know this, where Breton and the people of the moment kind of laughed off this other group called Le Grand Jeu, which we could have used Le Grand Jeu to get into another spectrum of consciousness right today. They were doing magical experiments with René Dumas and Gilbert Lecomte, and they could see into the invisible. They were doing exercises with seeing into the invisible. What if we had that as heritage? Where would this deal with collectively on this planet? What if the Muslims and the American Indians had converged in 1256? Where would we be at today as a human race? So I just want to leave us with this understanding of how we can work with ourselves through poetry or through thought alchemically and rise into another level of consciousness. I want to thank you for your time, and thank you for Woodland Panther and everybody. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Roberto, one more time. Thank you for Evan, Mimi, Garrett, all of you. This has been tremendous. And I invite you now to stick around, enjoy the good company, and the good books. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks.